be looking at the government's macroeconomic objectives. Now, some of you may have already, for those who have done GCSE economics before, you would have briefly touched upon it. So this is one of the key topics that you start with once you do go into year 12, and it forms the basics of all your entire macroeconomics for this year. So it's split into micro and macro, and when you're doing your macroeconomics for this year going forward, the main thing that you do start with is the government's macroeconomic objectives. So I thought it may be good to have a look at the government's macroeconomic objectives as a starting point for today. So I'm just going to share my screen here. And that way, there we go. I can put that on the board. Right, let's put that here. We've got the macroeconomic objectives. Okay, let's list the main macroeconomic objectives first. To start with, we have growth, we have low unemployment, followed by low and stable inflation. Oops. We also have a stable balance of payment. At this stage, you only look at the current account of the balance of payment. Going into year 13, you look at the balance of payment into a lot more detail. We also look at another macroeconomic objective, which is government's balance. Government budget. We also have protection of the environment. And the last one, we have distribution of income. In other words, low inequality. Now, I'm going to look at each of these in detail, starting with the very first one, which is economic growth. So when you're studying economic growth at this stage, you look at what economic growth is to start with. When we say economic growth, we look at the increase in GDP levels. GDP being gross domestic product, which is also the increase in the production of goods and services in an economy, usually measured over a year, can also be done monthly. So we're looking at more production. And remember our main economic agents before we go into it. We've got three main economic agents that we look at. We have the consumers, we have the producers, and we have the government. So every time we now look at the impact of anything, we think about what's going to happen to consumers, how is this going to impact producers, and what is going to be the effect on the government. So now if we look at economic growth and we were to look at more production of goods and services by businesses, which means businesses are now producing more goods and more services, what are the benefits of that going to be? So firstly, why do we want economic growth in a country, which is very, very important to know, because we have something called the main economic cycle here. Put that out. Another one. Sorry. Right, we've got the main economic cycle here, as you can see, is measured against real GDP and time. And over time, you have periods of economic growth seen by the peak here. Once you reach the peak, you've got economic growth, followed by a recession. So here your economy is starting to contract and we're going through a recession, which is where we are pretty much at the moment given COVID-19, which is where we also were back in 2008 when we had the Great Recession. So what happened was we were here initially, period of economic growth, which is your peak, followed by a decline or a contraction. We've then got a recession here, which we're going to go into in a second. And then the economy follows a route of expansion and back to economic growth, back to decline, and so on. So that's how the economy really works, where we've got periods of economic growth followed by periods of economic decline or a recession. And before we go into that, let's just put down what a recession is, since we just saw that on the diagram. This is when you have 2 to 3 quarters or 6 to 8 months of negative growth, right? And that's your economic growth, which is the increase. So this would be opposite, be a decrease in your GDP levels, decrease in production of goods and services. Businesses are producing lesser goods and services now in a recession, whereas in a period of economic growth, we have more production. And remember, more production means businesses or firms, as we say in economics, will be making higher profits. These profits can be used for, in economics, we say research and development. We can improve the quality that way, expand your business, and so on, right? So you've got more profits. The other thing is when you're producing more, you need workers to produce this. So when you are producing more, because you've got economic growth, more production means firms hire more workers, which means you will have more employment, which is our second macroeconomic objective, which we're going to go into in a bit. So we revert back to that, but for now, just more workers working, more employment. Why is more employment good? We're going to look into it under our second macroeconomic objective. So you've got more production, firms require more workers and therefore more employment. Remember, when there's more production and more employment, we also have more tax revenue for the government through both indirect and direct taxes. Remember, direct taxes, we have income tax, which goes straight out of our pockets once we earn our wages. So that's called direct taxes. On the other hand, we have indirect taxes, which is, for example, VAT. Let's put that here. So you got indirect, for example, we have VAT. And we have direct here, which is income taxes. There's also another type of, or another example of direct tax called corporation taxes, which is basically what businesses pay. So remember, businesses also pay taxes to the government. So for example, if I work for a business, I will pay income tax to the government, and the business will pay corporation tax, which is after making all its money, it reduces the costs. It takes away the cost of the businesses, whatever it's left. It pays a certain amount of tax on that to the government. So why is there more income tax and more corporation tax and more VAT? Firstly, why is there more VAT? Is because there's more employment. People have more income during economic growth. Remember, more production. People have more income. They're going to go and spend it. They're going to go to a restaurant, purchase a meal. They're going to pay VAT on that. They're going to go shopping, pay VAT on that, which is all tax revenue for the government. Why will we have more income tax? Because of more employment. When people are working, there's more employment. They are going to pay more income tax to the government, and corporation taxes because businesses are producing more. They're making more money. So they're going to pay corporation taxes to the government. So economic growth is good in that way because the government gets all this money from businesses, from workers, and through VAT. So all of that adds to the government's revenue, which is our 5th balanced government budget, which we're going to also be looking at. So that adds to it and improves it and helps you meet your macroeconomic objectives. Remember, these are the goals that a government always tries to achieve. Now, so when you have more economic growth, you've got more production, which means firms are making more profits, more employment, more tax revenue for the government. You can also export all of this. So So what you can really do, let's put that here, more exports. Remember, what are exports is when your country's goods are being bought by another country abroad. The goods leaving your country to another country because someone from another country has bought something that you produce. Why is that good? Again, you're expanding your customer base. You've got more consumers now. Not only are more local people going to buy from you, but also internationally, there's going to be more demand and they're all going to buy more goods from you. So you're going to have more exports, which again can boost revenue for firms. Here, boost revenue. Right, so that's why you want economic growth. The opposite, when you've got a recession, we've got literally the opposite of all of that. We've got less production. Firms are making less profits. You can see that right now with the coronavirus. What's happening is we're heading towards a big recession. For those of you who do follow up on the news, BBC, I highly recommend you to download the BBC app on your phones. And if you just refresh it even twice or thrice a day, you'll be able to see how it's related to all your macroeconomic objectives. Literally pick up anything that's on the news relevant to the economy, and you'll be able to literally sit and think about what happens to each of these. So for example, right, the other day it said the government is reducing VAT from 20%, which is this bit here, we were doing indirect taxes a minute ago, from 20% to 5% now. And that was on the BBC, for example. They explained what VAT is in the BBC articles. If you go a little bit towards the bottom, it'll give you an analysis by an editor, and they would actually tell you, from an economics perspective, what it is. So I would highly recommend you watching that, because they explain why the government is reducing VAT from an economics perspective. And at this point in time, as you all very well know, there's a lack of spending. People aren't spending as much. People aren't going to restaurants and spending. People aren't shopping for a variety of reasons, right? Lots of people have lost their jobs. Lots of people are fearing a second wave, so they are saving up on their money. Why go spend when we don't even know if we're going to have our jobs tomorrow? What if our business shuts down? If there's a second wave and the firm I work for example, shuts down, I'm going to lose my job. So best to save up on money right now, because people are expecting tough times, right? Our consumer confidence, as we call it, is at an all-time low. So what the government is now doing is getting people to spend. So it's reduced VAT levels, for example, from 20% to 5% to encourage spending. So people go out there and spend, which could basically boost demand and economic growth in an economy. So right now, what we have is a period of negative economic growth. I show you an article here the other day, this one that I pulled out. And if we see here, we've got the UK economy shrinks 20.4% in April 2020. If you look here, right, this shows us monthly GDP growth in terms of percentages from 1997 all the way up until 2020. Now, again, at AS level of those who are going into year 12 now, there's a lot of graphs and charts that you're going to have to read and interpret. So again, the relevance to the BBC articles, every time you see a BBC article and you see a chart, try reading it, try making sense out of it. Why is this important? Can I relate any of this to the macroeconomic objectives? And most of the times you will see that, right? And let me show you how. So this came up the other day, where in April 2020, they've seen negative 20.4%. And if you look at it from 1997 all the way up until now, we have not had this bigger fall. It says here, if we look, the contraction now is 3 times greater than the decline seen during the whole of the 2008-2009 economic downturn. For those of you who do know, we had the Great Recession, 2008 onwards, for a couple of years. You can see that here. You got red lines there showing negative economic growth. If you look at that there, it says it shrank by no more than 1% in a single month. And look at it here now. it's dropped all the way to negative 20.4. That one's March, so that's just the month before. April was our first full month of lockdown in the UK. March, somewhere towards the end, is when our lockdown started. So in March, we still had negative economic growth, but it wasn't as bad as April 2020 because that was our first month of actually having a full, complete lockdown. And you can see the impact of that because our economy shrank by negative 20.4%. Now, that's a lot, which implies that the government has to do a lot to bring the economy back up, right? For example, it has to spend a lot, which the government is doing right now. It's a lot of spending. The government is supporting a lot of businesses right now to help them get back to business. The government has also started the furlough scheme. We can see that here. The government is, have a look at that, 9 million workers are now covered by the UK furlough scheme. For those of you who have been following up on this, must have heard from your friends and family how the government has started the furlough scheme where, they are providing workers whose businesses are now shut temporarily or were shut because of the lockdown, to providing them with income so that they don't lose their jobs. And so when the economy does start up again, it's just going to be a matter of them returning to work straight away the minute their business or shop opens up, as opposed to them, if the government didn't do this, it was very well aware that businesses will not be able to cover their costs. And if businesses can't cover their costs, they would lay off workers. And now if you lose your job, it's going to be very hard for you to get back to work. So even if, say, your business shut down, the government did not support you, you lost your job, and 3 months later, government says, okay, everything's open, everyone get back to work. The problem is you've got nothing to go back to because you've lost your job. So now you're going to be a big burden for the government because now you're going to go run to the government and say, please help me. And then the government will have to support you through benefits. Again, remember, when you're unemployed in the UK, the government supports you through unemployment benefits. If you're able to show that you are working, that you can work, that you're able and willing to work, but you can't find work. And if you're able to prove that, then the government will support you and give you, a certain amount every few weeks that will help you. Now, the problem with that's going to be, you can't go back to work if the government didn't support you and your business would have shut down. You couldn't go back to work. You would then be claiming benefits from the government for a couple of months. So again, that would take a long time to kickstart the economy. So the government did, for example, the UK furlough scheme. Again, very, very important for you guys to look into at this stage. You should know how it works, can again come up in your data responses. So for those of you who don't know, for at AS level, throughout your year 12, what they do is they give you news articles. So could be something recent, could be something a lot older, but usually it's within the last 5 years. They pick up news articles, they put them all together, and they give you a big passage. And the questions are based on that. So for example, you could have a question in the exam or a passage in the exam which shows you impacts of the coronavirus. And it could literally have, for example, this chart that you'd be expected to read, this that you'd be expected to, again, interpret. They could put the charts together, they could put lots of text together and say, coronavirus game, this happened economically. And then all your questions would be based on that. So it's important for you to understand, especially now, the relevance of, the impact of COVID-19 on the economy at your stage is very important because it could come up and they would expect you to understand it. Now, a lot of the information they would give you, but for example, if this was to come up as a chart, they would not sit and explain to you what the furlough scheme really is. They may drop a line here or two and say, the furlough scheme has been provided or the government started the furlough scheme to support workers, but that's about it. And then you could have a question in which would require you to understand what the furlough scheme really is. So it's important for you to have all this information, especially now with COVID-19 and all the economic impacts and that. So make sure you are in line with what is going on in the news. Download the BBC app, refresh your page every few days. You can select also, if you've got the BBC app, you can select the topics that you're most interested in, and then it just gives you either breaking news, or it gives you on your homepage, it gives you the articles which are most related to the topics you've chosen. So if you just select like business, economy, economics, global economy again, so these would basically give you all this information that you do need. So make sure you're in line with all of that. Going back to this, so we've seen how the recession, 6 to 8 months of negative economic growth, can hit, and all the impacts on that. The problem of that is the government has to increase spending, and we can see that a lot, right? We can see how now so many businesses have shut their branches. We've heard John Lewis has shut its branches, Debenhams has shut lots of high street shops, Boots. Recently, this just came up on the news again 2-3 days ago. Boots has shut a lot of its branches everywhere as well. And again, that's going to cause unemployment. You shut your branch, you don't need as many workers anymore. So that ties in with our second macroeconomic objective, and why we want low unemployment. Remember, unemployment is not you just sitting at home and saying, I'm unemployed. Unemployment is when you are able and willing to work but cannot find work. So you're actively sitting there and looking for work but can't find work. It is measured at your stage. You need to know it's measured through the Claimant Count and the Labour Force Survey, which is carried out by the International Organization. So what they really do, looking at the second one here, Labour Force Survey, which is carried out by the International Labour Organization, what they do is they carry out a survey. They go to about 60,000 households in the UK and ask them questions as to when were they last in employment, have they been actively looking for a job, are they ready to start work if they were to find something tomorrow, and therefore they basically measure unemployment. Now this is a good way, even though it's expensive, because you have to go to the houses or send them a questionnaire by post, expect a reply. If they don't reply, you chase up on it. So it's obviously expensive, but at the same time it's the best method to compare unemployment levels internationally. Whereas the Claimant Count, which is this one here, which is this one here. Okay, we've got two methods. What the Claimant Count does is it looks at the amount of people claiming benefits. Now, that cannot be used to compare unemployment levels internationally for a couple of reasons. The main reason being in different countries, you have different benefit system. Where the state gives out benefits, based on different criteria. So, and some countries don't even have that. Some countries don't even give benefits if you're unemployed. So if you are to compare, unemployment in for example, in the UK as opposed to India, that you can't use the Claimant Count. So there you would use Labour Force Survey. The Claimant Count is the number of people claiming benefits, and the way in which that works is you have to go every 2 weeks and show that you're actively looking for work. So you have to show a couple of applications you've made and show that, okay, I applied to so-and-so place, this is what they said, and I got rejections and so on. And then they give you the amount for the benefit, every 2 months into your account. You have to show that you have a very low level of savings, because otherwise you can't claim benefits. So you can't, for example, have £15,000 in your bank account and then go and say, hello, I'm unemployed, I need to claim benefits, because the government wouldn't then support you because you've got a sufficient level of savings. So it has to be a very, very low amount in your bank account to show that, okay, you really can't support yourself and therefore you're claiming benefits. Problem with the Claimant Count is, A, we already mentioned, can't be used to compare unemployment levels internationally, but B, is it could be an overestimate or an underestimate. Usually what happens is, if you are able to take cash in hand, and lots of people are able to take cash in hands for the jobs they do. For example, a lot of cleaners and carpenters and painters take cash in hand for the odd jobs that they do. And then on the side, they go claim benefits. So this is a big problem that we have, because then our claimant count is overestimated. Because technically, even if you are taking cash in hand, technically you are employed. You do have a job, but you're showing to the government that you don't. So that's a problem you have. And on the other hand, you can also have it being an underestimate, where you may be sitting at home applying for jobs, looking for work, you can't find work, but you're not claiming benefits because you don't need it. Maybe your parents have enough money to support you and say, don't worry, for now you can take some money from us, for example. So typically speaking, you are unemployed and you should be included in the unemployment figures, but you're not claiming benefits because you don't need the money. So that's going to be an underestimate. So that's a problem using these methods of unemployment, but to measure unemployment, but it is what's used. Remember, you can't be sitting at home and, for example, be disabled and say I'm unemployed, because then you're not able. The definition has to follow through. You must be able and willing to work, but you can't find work. So that's the main definition that we do follow, and throughout that you will follow. So for example, a child who can't go out there and work is not unemployed. A disabled person is not unemployed. You have to be able, you have to be willing, you have to be sitting in front of your computer actively, applying for job, getting rejections, can't find a job, and then you're classified as being unemployed. So that's important to understand here. We don't want high unemployment because, remember, as we mentioned, you then end up claiming benefits, so you become a bigger strain for the government. There's also a lot of crime and theft. If you're unemployed, people will start stealing and trying to make ends meet. Also less tax for the government. So in hindsight, it becomes a big burden for the government. So the government does everything it can to stop people from being unemployed, right? So it's a key macroeconomic objective, low unemployment. You always want low unemployment. So going throughout your year 12, what you're going to be doing is, firstly, briefly doing the macroeconomic objectives, so you know what they are. What you're then going to be doing is you're going to be exploring each of these in detail, and that's going to be your whole course. So for example, economic growth would be a few weeks, followed by low unemployment, inflation, and so on. So going forward, that's what we're going to be doing as well. We're going to break these into topics, and we're going to be looking at each of these individually in terms of the causes of each, the consequences of each, and what the government can do to monitor and make sure that we are meeting our macroeconomic objectives. And if we're not, the government would intervene and try and make sure that we do achieve them, because they're important for the reasons that we've discussed. For example, we did for the first two. We said why economic growth is important, because it has benefits. We discussed how low unemployment is important, because if it's too high, we have problems. So that's what we're going to look at for each of these topics. We're going to look at what is the problem going to be if we don't meet our macroeconomic objectives, and then in the second half of the course, the last part of the course, it's then followed by the policies. Different schools teach it differently. Some do it midway, some do it towards the end, where you look at the policies that the government can use to meet your macroeconomic objectives, which is what the government is doing right now. The government is using a lot of policies to bring the economy back to recovery, because we're going through a period of economic decline, which has negative impacts. So that's what we're going to be looking at going forward throughout the course. I just thought it might be a bit useful to give you a bit of background knowledge as to how this really works. If you have any questions, please do write on the chat box. Michelle, do you have any questions?
No, nothing's come through yet. So I'm going to give people another minute or so, maybe if they want to type something up. Yeah.
Got it.
Just, I guess in the meantime, it'd be interesting just talking through what we did, something similar in the last one. We talked about the idea of chains of reasoning, and how that's important to exam technique. Do you want to just say a few words on that, how you might sort of structure your answer?
Sure. So at this stage, it's slightly different. So the things we look at when you are answering a question is knowledge, application, analysis, and evaluation. So when you are answering questions, or explaining your points, or answering any question as you go forward in your year 12, you look at these 4 key concepts. You look at knowledge, which explains all your basically is all your definitions or your understanding of the topic, followed by application, which is your real world application to the topic, like we did when we did the recession. We spoke about COVID-19 and its impact. So that would be application. Earlier on throughout the years, when there were questions that used to come up on recession and stuff, they would always relate it back to financial recession of 2008 and base questions on that. So a lot of general knowledge. Again, what you should also know is how the 2008 recession happened, what caused it, and what the impacts of that were, and how different it is, for example, to the one that we're having now, the one that we're going into now. So again, that's all real world application. It's not enough to know or say in an exam question, for example, the recession hit due to COVID-19 and we had unemployment. That's not enough. You must go into percentages. You must go into months. Like we discussed a couple of minutes ago, we said April 2020, we had negative economic growth of negative 20.4%. So that's very important to say. It's not enough to say, okay, we just had unemployment and that's it. So again, this is what's expected from you when you're doing application. It's the real world knowledge that you are expected to apply. We then have analysis, which is basically your chains of reasoning. And when we're talking about this, we are looking at how one thing leads to another, which leads to another. And those are basically your chains of reasoning. For example, I could say when we have economic growth, we have a lot of employment, right? So more economic growth means more employment. And the opposite, when we have a recession, we have a lot of unemployment, right? So economic growth, more employment, recession, more unemployment. But that's not enough to say. So for example, if I said COVID-19 led to a recession, which meant a lot of people lost their jobs, and so there was high unemployment. So that's what a standard, probably a C grade answer would look like, or a C grade statement would look like. But if you're stepping that up to achieve the higher mark, you must need your chains of reasoning where you say, for example, the recession of 2020 started due to COVID-19. A recession is when, and here we use our definition here, and we say this is what we had, or this is what we were going into, and therefore businesses shut down. And because businesses shut down, they laid off their workers, which meant workers were no longer required for production, and therefore workers lost their jobs, which led to unemployment. And then we explain what unemployment is, which is when you're able and willing to work, but you can't find work. We couldn't find any work, or workers couldn't find any work because there was no demand. People weren't buying anything. So all these high street shops, as we mentioned before, John Lewis, Debenhams, they're all shutting down their stores. And because of that, the workers are being unemployed. So it's important to not only say or explain all your chains of reasoning with say this leads to another, which leads to another, and therefore we have this. It's also important to apply it at your stage, at AS and A level, to be able to apply it to the real world, to say when it really happened, what happened. Again, it's not enough to say businesses shut down. When you are explaining in your answer, you say businesses such as, John Lewis had to close so many of its stores. So which is why, again, I was saying at your stage, it's very important to know the application so you can link it to your analysis. And the last bit that we then have is our evaluation, which looks at the extent to which the statement you've just made is correct. So that's again about 30% of your paper, 30 to 40%, I would say, where you're meant to evaluate. So, for example, if I made a statement where I've said a lot of businesses shut down, and businesses really struggled during COVID-19. I could evaluate that by so businesses such as John Lewis blah blah struggled. I can evaluate that by saying, well, however, there were lots of businesses that actually did experience a lot of growth. For example, Zoom, for example, Amazon, Netflix, as people started working more from home, spending more time at home, and explaining your chains of reasoning again, people were resorting more to these methods, and therefore that boosted growth in other sectors. So I've said, yes, it did lead to the shutdown of a lot of businesses. However, not to the extent that every single business was suffering. There were businesses that did experience periods of growth and boost, and give examples. So those are the main things you look at when you are doing AS level. Evaluation is tricky. Well, all of these are roughly slightly towards the trickier end. This is what we explore as we do each topic in more detail. You look at how all of these four are relevant, but at this stage, it's just important to know what they are.
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, I think the other thing I was going to ask you, because we've not had any other questions come through, is you've told me before that you're working on putting together some notes to help students through A level. Do you want to say a few words about that in terms of how that's progressed?
Yeah, just putting together some notes for AS as well as A level and some GCSE as well, just in terms of the content, which would just help students answer not only the questions in terms of their knowledge, also in terms of application, just because there's so much going on now because of COVID-19. And I know all the students do follow up or can follow up from the news. It's a bit hard at this stage to see how to apply it to questions. So a lot of the notes I'm making have a lot of relevance to real world examples and stuff as well. So earlier on, they were more focused on the recession, and that's what we had, and the questions were based on that. But now we're sort of expecting a trend towards questions, to do with COVID-19 and the economic impacts of that. So yeah, I'm working on my notes, which incorporates all of that to make it easier for students to understand that, and I'm also including a few questions sort of for students to understand the exam technique and how to answer questions using these key 4 bits, which is knowledge, application, analysis, and evaluation.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. So it doesn't look like we've got any other questions. So what I'm going to do is just sort of bring this session to a close. For anyone that joined late, you can of course watch from the beginning by just visiting the post on Facebook. For those of you who have enjoyed it, please do like it, share it, and so that other people can benefit from the session if they weren't able to join live. As you will know, or hopefully you'll gather, this is part of a series of 8 sessions. So this first one is free. Subsequent sessions are paid for and are in Zoom. They're held in Zoom in a small classroom type environment, an online classroom. So there'll be a lot more interactive between students and Zara. So you get to ask more questions in that live forum. So please do book onto the full course. Again, the link to book is in the post. So thank you all very much for joining today. And thank you again, Zara, for preparing a wonderful session.
Oh, no problem at all. I hope the students took something away to learn from that. I would also send you the board across so you can put it up for those who do want to see that later on.
Excellent. All right. Thanks very much, everyone. Take care.
No problem. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.